Greetings, I'm Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this V1 Fiesler, or Fiesler, FI-103. I'm going to build a flying bomb. I wonder if that's going to be an immediate demonetization. In case you're an absolute moron, or an algorithm, it's not a real bomb, it's a 48th scale plastic model from Tamiya. Unlike most of Tamiya's kits, this one has both the painting and marking guide and the instructions on the back of the box. Probably because the assembly is so very simple. That's not a bad thing, and I suppose it does save a tiny bit of paper. Inside the box, you get a single sprue molded in a grey coloured plastic, with all the parts you need to make both the V1 and the little cart they'd move it around on. There are less than 20 parts here. It's almost like a wargaming kit. It isn't, though I guess if you wanted, you could use it as an objective marker or something like that. The low part count isn't a bad thing, and the parts are nice and neatly moulded with a minimum of mould lines, which of course means a minimum of cleanup time. And while I'm sure there are better, more detailed models of the V1, this one is a fairly decent looking and well detailed representation, and that's pretty much what you'd expect from Tamiya. Very well designed models that go together easily, with quite good but not extreme rivet counter pleasing detail. There's also a set of decals included, with a lot of small bits of text that I can't read. I mean, I can read it, as in I can make out the letters, I just can't read German. Anyway, it's time to glue some bits of plastic together. I figured starting with the dolly, or cart. Not really sure which is most appropriate, not really sure it even matters. Anyway, you can use it to hold the fuselage as you build that. Putting it together is about as simple as it could be. There's keying, so you get the upper part joined to the frame neatly, and so you get the two halves of the upper part aligned properly. There is in fact a correct way around for the upper and lower halves to be installed relative to each other. I'm not sure how important that is, but I did follow the instructions. I add the wheels next because why not? The wheels can go on either way, it doesn't seem to matter, though you might notice that some of them have a bit of a sink mark on one side. It would look better if that was facing inward toward the frame. I didn't notice at the time though, so a couple of mine look bad. Just the worst possible thing that could happen. There's a handle for either end of the cart, and they slot into the little mounting things on either end quite easily. It seemed both natural, and like what the instructions wanted, to let them flop down so they're sitting on the floor. So that's what I did, and that's the little cart completed. I start on the V1 itself by gluing the two halves of the fuselage together. To make this a bit easier, I do the front first, and make sure it's all aligned as best I can get it, and then I do the rear. There is keying, but there is still a tiny bit of play, so you may have to do some nudging and apply a bit of pressure to get it to look good. It could probably do with a little bit more work on the join, but that's for another time. Next I install the little grille thing at the front of the engine. The keying does make this pretty easy, but I would suggest making sure this is aligned with the fuselage. There isn't much play to it, but it is enough that you can have it on a bit of an angle, which is what I have. I didn't realise before installing the cowling, and once that's on and bonded into place, it's probably a little bit too late to make any adjustments. It could be worse, I suppose. And here, you can see the dolly being used to hold the fuselage upright, which is important for some reason. Now it's time for wings. I start with the horizontal stabilizers at the rear. Surely they're wings? Even if they're not, they aren't difficult to install. There's guide tabs, and the left stabilizer has a pin. That's how you know it goes on the left. The one for the right hand side lacks a pin. You may have to do a bit of nudging to get both of these on neatly, but that's nothing too difficult. Then, the other wings, the main wings. These also have different pin configurations to make sure you're putting them on the correct side. The main problem with these is that there's a bit of a gap between the wing and fuselage. Looking at reference pictures would suggest that this is not historically accurate. It shouldn't be too difficult to fill those gaps, so I don't really think it's a big issue. From this angle you can really see the misaligned grille. Just try not to look, I guess. Anyway, that's really all there is to this build. You can sit the V1 on the dolly rather easily. There's a raised bit along the bottom of the fuselage that kind of slots into a notch on the dolly, and it will stay together fairly well with friction. You could glue it of course, but keeping them separate will obviously make painting much easier. So that's it. The V1 Fiesler FI-103 in 48th scale from Tamiya is completed. That was nice and quick. Sometimes a simple, quick-to-build kit is just what the doctor ordered. What I'm getting at is not everything has to be a huge, long project. More important than the duration of the build is that the result is quite good. As I said before, there are probably more detailed V1 kits out there, but this one is a pretty good representation, and realistically, at least in my opinion, there isn't a lot more extreme detail that you could add to something like this. Not unless you're adding interior parts and open panels, I suppose. Which would be interesting and cool, but there's nothing wrong with a simple model, if that's what you want. And in this case, it's what I wanted. Of course, there are some bits that would benefit from some putty and a bit more work to make it look better, but these videos I do aren't usually about modifying kits anyway. It's really more to show how the kit goes together when built by your average simpleton, and that's me. Anyway, it's a nice model, it's easy and enjoyable to build, and I think it's going to look pretty good once it's painted up, and I'm kind of tempted to do that sooner than later. It doesn't seem like it would be overly time consuming to paint either. Probably don't hold your breath for that though. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comments section below. If you want to watch me build kits like this one live, I stream modeling a couple of times a week over on Twitch. There's a link in the description. Subscribe if you want to see more of this kind of thing, share the video with anybody you think might find it interesting, and if you really like what I do, consider supporting on Patreon or Ko-fi. Links for those are in the description too. Take care of yourselves, be excellent to each other, and thanks for watching. Farewell.